It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Chana Cormer. Your maiden name was Rothstein.
Mm-hmm.
We're here with Miriam Greiver in your beautiful home in Jerusalem. And Chana, you were born in 1946 in a DP camp in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could tell us a little bit about your family and your story, your incredible story.
Okay. My parents would not have met if it wasn't for the Holocaust. My father was Lithuanian, my mother Hungarian. They were thrown together by the war. In Lithuania, from 1941, they were in ghetto, in hard labor, and then they were taken in the summer of 44 to Stutthof, where they spent a few days, and then were taken on to Dachau. A few days being beaten and whatever, and that's where he did not know, but his sister was being kept there because he saw women getting on the trains and going on to Dachau, so he thought his sister was still with him, and this was quite important. There were 10 children. She was the youngest, he was number 9, and he felt very responsible for her since the parents had been taken in 1941 to the forest and shot into a mass grave. And when he had gone to the synagogue where they had collected all the elders, what does elders mean? Over 40s and people with families. He went and he said, "Mama, Tata, I'm going with you." And they said, no, you have to go home and wait for Perla. So he, for the next 3 years, took care of his youngest sister and would sneak out to get food or whatever from the ghetto, and this was his big responsibility, and he did not realize that she was left in Stutthof with some of the Lithuanian women. So he came to Dachau. He was a carpenter. By the age of 16 in Lithuania, he had his carpentry shop. He had a tischlerei, and so when they said, who is a carpenter here, he raised his hand, and he became the head of tischlerei of Lager 10. That's the way he would explain it, and it gave him an opportunity to help others, because he kept saying, we have so much work, we need more people in the tischlerei. Meantime, my mother grew up in rural, I forgot to say, my father was from Tavrik, which is in the Kovna province. He was taken to Shavli ghetto. That's his history. He, in Tavrik, he lived with his extended family, his brothers, his father and mother, his grandparents, his uncles and aunts. They all lived in Tavrik, which was a community that was about half of the population of Tavrik was Jewish. So it was, and they had many synagogues. It was a developed kind of small town. My mother came from a village called Korafovla, Karoyafov, I think, and they were the only Jewish family. They had land, they had vineyards, and it came from the side of my mother's mother. The grandmother lived with them as well, and they would grow the grapes, and also the yeshiva boys would come to stamp out the grapes, and they would make kosher wine, and my grandmother was sort of the businesswoman and would sell the wine. My grandfather was a chassid of Tenenbaum, one of the Tenenbaum family that were in Chateau Uheli, and related to what Satmar is today. And she had 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, and she was the oldest, my mother. And she went to a Catholic high school because they were very much for education. There was no education for girls, so she stayed with her aunt in Sharspotak, which was more, they called the college town. It had a college, it had high schools, and she stayed there. Her brother, in the meantime, was in yeshiva, and he was considered a Louis. He was very, very bright, and that was the family. The youngest daughter was 12 at the time they were taken to ghetto. They were taken to ghetto to Uheli, along with other. This is what we're talking about is northeastern Hungary in the Tokaj Valley, which is known for growing wine. Mm-hmm. And this is the closest big town is Miskolc, And so from there, they were taken, as I said, to the ghetto. The ghetto was a short-lived thing, was 3 weeks. This was the very quick plan to get rid of all the Jews in Hungary, so it was done very quickly. They had felt fairly secure in Hungary till quite late, and then they were taken there, and their Catholic neighbors brought them food to the ghetto. They had very good relationships with their neighbors in the village. They had grown up with these people. So in some time around Shavuot, just before Shavuot, something like that, of 1944, they were taken to Auschwitz, all of them, separated, of course, men and women. And then when my mother was in line for the selection, her mother, her sister, her aunts, her cousins were all taken to one side, and she was taken to the other side. And she said, "But I'm with them." And someone who's a kapas came up to her and said, "Sweetie, you'll see them on the other side." And she saved her. She went to the other side. Of course, within a day, they were already had gone through the gas chambers. So the men survived. My mother's brother had actually been an Arbeitsdienst for the Hungarian army. He'd been taken early, had been conscripted, and he liked to take care of horses. He took care of horses, and he escaped one day with a horse and went to Budapest. So that's a side story. But my mother and all the women in her family perished, except for her, when they were taken to Auschwitz. Her father and uncle survived for a while and were in labor there. I don't know exactly, but she was in Auschwitz for a month or two. She became very close to 3 other women who she didn't know before. The 4 of them became a group, and they had all lost the women in their family, and they helped each other survive. They were taken from Auschwitz to Dachau. The same 4 women were part of the same group. When they got to Dachau, for some reason, I don't know if it was the Kampfführer or one of the officers said, "You 4 girls." He thought one of them apparently looked like his daughter. This was a story, I don't know when they heard this story, but he took the 4 girls in a row. "You will work in the kitchen." So my mother was working in the kitchen with her 3 friends from Auschwitz, and that is how she met my father, because my father would come to get the food for the carpentry shop. And so he knew who she was, but there was not a relationship there. When they were liberated from Dachau, they were taken to Wolfhausen, which is close by, and there was some time of recuperation. I'm not sure about the timing, something of a month or so. The Youth Aliyah came to them and said, "Who wants to go to Israel?" And the young people who said they wanted to go to Israel were taken by British trucks over the Alps and into Italy, and then further down to the south to be more available for the boats that would be going to Israel, the illegal. Yes, go on? Yes? Okay. So now we are in southern Italy. They've just arrived. They are not a couple, my mother and my father. They're young people in their 20s, a whole group of young people in their early 20s, and my father describes it this way. They had just arrived at Gan Eden. They had just arrived at paradise. The sea was beautiful, and the hills. And they come to Santa Maria El Bagno, Santa Maria Caterina, which is right next to it, and there is a huge cliff. There's a cliff there, and they came off the trucks, and all the young guys go to the cliff and jump into the water. This was freedom. So eventually all these young people paired up within a very short time. We're talking about 1945, April, let's say May, June, after the recuperation, they arrived there. By October, my parents were getting married, and I was born 9.5 months later. So I was born in the summer of 1946. very shortly after all of this had occurred to them. And they went from this hell to a kind of heaven, as far as they loved every little thing they got. If they had a little piece of meat, they were so excited. If they had a nice little meal, my father calls it the best time of their lives, because there was something about it that was, the freedom, first of all. And in that area was set up also food distributing places, and the Italians also were given food. The Italians and the Jews formed some sort of a relationship, because even though the Italians hadn't been in the concentration camps, they were poor, they hadn't done well, they didn't have food, they were also destitute in some way. And here the Joint came and was helping the Jews, and the Jews would try to help the Italians a little bit as well.
Can you tell me what your parents told you about the camp? How did they spend their days?
Well, my father, being a carpenter, you would think that he would have gone to get some carpentry work. But apparently that wasn't so easy to actually have a carpentry shop or to get work that way. But he was always very industrious. And one of the strange things that happened is that everybody sent them old clothes. All of the people that were refugees, that was one of the things people knew how to do, send them old clothing. So also his siblings, who had all moved to South Africa, were sending him old clothing. And there was so much old clothing that what he did, if there was a nice dress, he put it aside for his youngest sister, hoping to meet her one day. So he took all the dresses and he put them aside, the beautiful dresses, and then he and his friend, Samek, they would go to the shuk. There was a market in Gallipoli, not the same Gallipoli of World War I, but Gallipoli in southern Italy, and they would go to market and sell these clothing. And then they might have enough to buy a little tidbit to take home to treat their wives. So Samek and Tsipu, this couple, Tsipu was one of the women that my mother went through Auschwitz with and went through Dachau with, and were liberated together. And she also found a partner in southern Italy, and the four of them shared a room. They had a curtain down the middle, and they shared a room. And they were. What happened was that there were not yet barracks built. There were no actual DP camps built yet at that very early period. So at that time, the place that my parents and Tsipu and Sam were given were these cabanas, the places where you changed to go to the beach. So they lived in a cabana. And other refugees were housed in places that the British Army had taken over from wealthy Italians who would vacation in these areas. And these were beautiful, large villas with wonderful grounds, who housed a family. But 300 refugees were put into these. It's only at a later point that they were taken to Barletta. And Barletta was a DP camp. And there were a lot of Jewish displaced persons, but also non-Jewish displaced persons. And why Barletta? Because they were supposed to be going to Israel. So they were waiting near Bari, which is where the boats left from.
How did your parents meet?
My father came into the kitchen and took the food for the carpenters. So he met my mother in Dachau. In Dachau. He met her in Dachau, but they were not a couple at the time, and only afterwards.
In Italy?
In Italy, they became a couple, and yes. Most of the time, he was taking care of a younger cousin that he helped kind of pull through Dachau. But yes.
And you were born in?
I was born, there was, at the tip of the heel of the boot is a place called Santa Maria de Leuca. You have to, all the Italians, please have to excuse me on all my pronunciations of Hungarian or Italian places, but as close as I can get to that. At the tip of the boot was a lighthouse, because this is Land's End. And and that's the meaning of Santa Maria de Leuca, it's Land's End. And there was a convent there, and a hospital. And so, because they didn't know how transportation, they didn't, it wasn't like today, they didn't know how they would get a pregnant woman in time to the hospital. So when women were at the beginning of their 9th month or so, they were taken, and this is not far, this is in a car today, maybe an hour and a half, but they were taken to the convent. And these women stayed in the convent until the birth that they, at the hospital. And between the hospital and the convent, which was at the top of the hill, where the lighthouse was, there were, I think it was 350 steps, stone steps that go up. So women would get impatient about waiting around to give birth. So the nurses would tell them, go up and down the stairs, and then that'll bring on the birth. So one of the very exciting things when I got to Italy for my 30th anniversary with my husband Gerald Zikrono Levacha, when we got there for their this was his surprise that for 30th anniversary he would take me to this place that I'd heard all about it, but I'd never seen it. And when I saw those stairs, and they were real, I thought it wasn't just a story of my mother that she would have to go up and down these stairs in order to try to bring on the birth. It was very real. So the hospital at that time, at our 30th anniversary, was no longer functioning, but the building was still there. So,
how long were you there?
So I was 2.5 when my parents left southern Italy.
Do you remember anything about it?
No. I was, I think, too young.
Uh-huh. Did your parents tell you about what you did during the day? What they did during the day?
They say I spoke some Italian. I have no memory of it all. I spoke Yiddish and Italian because although my mother, as a Hungarian, her father spoke to her Yiddish. She spoke Hungarian to him. So that was kind of the way it was unless you were at yeshiva. And so she had a knowledge of Yiddish. And my father, coming from Lithuania, Yiddish was very central. The other languages, Russian or Lithuanian, were very much, he went to Cheder. Although the girls went to Hebrew high school. The girls went to Hebrew high school and they were all fluent in Hebrew because it was Beitar, they were religious, but they're of a different type than the Hungarians. So that was their common language, and so that was my first language, Yiddish, except with a lot of Hungarian additions that I would hear my mother saying, and I always thought were Yiddish, but they would turn out to be Hungarian. So one of the, we went by boat to America eventually, and instead of to Israel, which is a story in itself. But apparently I got measles on the boat to America, so they got a better room. They had to be in quarantine, so I helped out a little there.
Now, what did your mother tell you about the DP camp in Italy?
Not a lot. They really didn't tell me a lot. I have pictures of us there, which I can show you.
Okay.
And
do you have pictures of your parents' wedding?
It looks like my parents' wedding. Should I take it out because it's a bit shiny? Okay, my mother is in the gown. My father is standing. Now, this looks like a wedding. What they did was they didn't have a photographer at the time of the wedding. So that next to my mother is Tsipu, her very close friend, and next to Tsipu is Samek, her husband, And a couple of guys, they pulled off the street, I think, and then they put flowers in front of a table with a white cloth, and they took a picture so they would have a wedding picture. But actually, it's not the day of their wedding.
Lovely.
And these are more. This is more another one like that of the same day. Now, the wedding dress, my mother sewed. She made it. And it's the same wedding dress that we can see pictures, I don't have one here, but of Elizabeth wearing the same dress on her wedding day. My mother had learned to be a seamstress. One of the things in a religious family, they do shidduch for you, of course. And she, at the end of the war, would have been 22. Now, they were trying to do a shidduch during the war. And my mother was kind of saved because her uncle said to her father, don't do this to her. She doesn't need, she's fine, leave her. Because if she would have been married and had a baby, she wouldn't have survived, because those are the women that were immediately killed at Auschwitz. So, so this is I guess about a 1-year-old me with my parents in lovely southern Italy.
You just would never believe that your parents were survivors.
So your father was like an entrepreneur in Italy. He sold clothes, and your mother probably was.
She sewed her swimming suit. She sewed the clothing for us. Anything that she didn't have, she knitted. These are handmade. The trunks. For them, the sea, it was just, that was the recuperation. In a poem, I called it the heel of recuperation. The Italian heel of recuperation. I'll just do these later.
They're so special. These pictures are amazing.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
I'm telling you though, the quality that I have now is because of when this interviewer from Yad Vashem took my. I can show you the little scrappy ones. You were like very. Here, this kind of picture is what I had. These are the old photos.
Those are the originals.
These are the original type of ones. This is my father holding Samek on his back at the sea. And these were young guys just having, just enjoying life finally.
Here's a picture of you.
That's a picture of me and some kind of stroller that they got
Where
from somewhere.
Where did your parents live at the time?
At this time, they were in Santa Maria al Bagno.
Which meant what?
It's, if you look at the map of Italy, the heel of the boot, the very tip of the heel is where I was born, Santa Maria del Leuca. But if you go up the coast of the heel to the west, Santa Maria al Bagno is there about an hour and a half away. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of them. Everything is Santa Maria. Santa Maria.
And they lived in a separate home. They lived in a.
At that time they lived in a cabana. It was what it was used as for to changing clothes if you were going swimming. I have no photographs of my mother as a child because everything was destroyed. Their house was razed in the village. But I have this picture of my father when he was 16. It's the only kind of pre-Holocaust picture I have of either one of them.
How did you get it?
He's the youngest. Was number 9 of 10, and he had 6 siblings that one by one went to South Africa, living all over Johannesburg, Durban, Port Elizabeth. And this is our 2 families. This is Sam, Elizabeth, Larry, me, my mother, me, and my father. And you can see in the background, do you see that is the DP camp. You see a kind of unfinished wall. There is one of the few glimpses I have of what it was, the DP camp. Mm-hmm. They had these photographers who would come by. So, they would grab the photographers. They didn't have cameras or whatever, and they would get these very nice photos. The rest of these are not of the same. This is much later. So Larry was very important to me. Larry and I were both born in Italy. He a couple of months after me, and we grew up together. And he was cousin, brother, not just a friend. He was very close. I lost him June.
This June? This past June.
Yeah, he had ALS, and he was a very amazing ALS. He was quite something.
Yeah.
So you had a friendship all these years?
So we were always in close contact, and he was like, we shared a certain history that only the two of us had. So, yeah, very special. Yeah, this is also me in Italy. It was you can see from the pictures, a very pleasant time. Very simple. Everything was very simple. We were wearing, hand-me-downs from somewhere.
But you all looked happy. You all looked very happy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's it for the photos. I had told you that they would go to market to sell clothing. So we have a picture of them in the market.
Where did they get their food from? From UNRWA?
No, from UNRWA.
It's not the same UNRWA.
Was it a different one?
It's a different one. But it's even spelled differently.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It was from the Joint.
It was from the Joint.
Yeah, the Joint had
who else was there besides the Joint?
All of the Tnuot Nora, all of the youth groups from Israel were there in order to get Aliyah come to Israel. And one of the things I understood after I met this group of people, there's a large group of people, as we said here, who were born in the same hospital and came on Aliyah. As I told you, my parents moved to the south in order to come on Aliyah and didn't. So what happened? Now I met these people who came here through a friend who knew that I was born in southern Italy, and I met this group about 10 years ago. And they were all here. So Larry and I, we had a different experience. We did not go to Israel. So I had been always told, my mother had said, well, I was pregnant, so we didn't get on the boats. Well, you were a little girl and they didn't want you on the boats. So it was all my fault. This is what I was told, that because of me, they didn't come to Israel.
I think it was a good excuse.
I know my father was Saruf Aliyah, because he was in Beitar, he was Lithuanian. But my mother, I'm not quite so sure. And but anyway, they didn't get on the boats. And I met people, when I met this group of people who had all been born in this hospital, born the day even before me, 2 days after me, in August. Wait a minute, how come their mother was pregnant and they were born in that hospital, right? They were in Italy, but they somehow came to Israel through Cyprus, right? So my parents had already passed away, so I couldn't ask them the question. How come? I think I figured it out though. Because of these groups of youth aliyah, a lot of people joined them and began to do different things to prepare themselves for aliyah, different professions, different crafts, and they went and stayed in these places, and they moved together as a group and came on aliyah. It could have been for individuals to get on the boat, might have been a different thing, and some of these boats may have been designated to different groups who were coming. I know my father's younger cousin, who he had been with the whole time in the ghetto and in the concentration camp, was 17 when the war was over and came with an aliyah group. But he had joined some group. I have a feeling it might have something to do with that.
Let me ask you a question. Your father was a carpenter, correct? Mm-hmm. Didn't he teach everybody
Yeah, this is very strange to me. I would have loved to have asked him these questions. Why didn't they take him to instruct the carpenters? Because they had... I don't know. I don't understand.
And your mother was a wonderful seamstress.
Exactly. They could have both been working as in an educational
correct
manner, but I don't know. I really don't understand how they fell out of that loop, but somehow. And they have very close friends who, one of the other women that my mother survived with, Yutka, moved to Rehovot. And so they did come on aliyah.
Yeah.
Their son was born in Italy as well. I don't know. It's these are questions that I can no longer answer.
Did you have any family in America? Distant relatives?
Well, no. What happened is that yes, I think very distant relatives. My mother, before the war, some of her distant cousins moved to America. Some of my father's as well. Not people that they were in such close contact with. It was second or third cousins or whatever. But what happened is that, as I told you, my mother and Elizabeth were like sisters, and they just they were sent papers by her uncle to come to America. They were sent to Kansas City by the Jewish agency, or I have no idea why Kansas City, but they were sent to Kansas City because they were sending them to all kinds of smaller towns and not to all be kept in New York. And I'm very happy that happened, that we weren't part of that kind of huge group of people that were stuck in New York. I think it was a good way to grow up. And when she got to America, Elizabeth said to her uncle, "There's somebody who is like my sister. I want you to sponsor her as well." And then they got sponsored by this uncle of Elizabeth's. And where were they going to live except in Kansas City? Next to, these were like relatives. So we grew up together in this very small Jewish community of Kansas City. But there were Holocaust survivors, other ones who came there, and every year there was a ceremony to remember Warsaw Ghetto Day, and it started much earlier, I think, than even here. It was pretty much the 100 families would have an event, and we, of course, the firstborn children were pushed forward to sing Zog nicht kein Mol and to speak at these events, because we were like, the future, the hope that they had survived for. Mm-hmm. It was.
Did your parents have regrets that they didn't go on Aliyah?
No, I don't think so. I think my father always, when he came, he had such warm feelings, they even tried to, at one time, purchase something, and it didn't work. And my father would get angry if things didn't work out, and he says, "Well, I'm not dealing with these Israelis anymore." So they never did. But they came very regularly. We went very regularly there. Yes, but that was... And my brother never left Kansas City, so they had kind of a split between, staying there and coming to Israel.
You had this very beautiful picture when you left.
Yes, this is the immigration photo. as all the Russian girls we saw when they came on Aliyah here to Israel in the 90s had these big bows in their hair, I guess it was what Hungarians did to their daughters as well. In this picture, I always had this big bow in my hair. So I'm just going to see if I have something here that we didn't see that might be of interest. I think we've seen all these kind of pictures. This is me at like 3.5, about a year after coming to America. And so,
do you remember the boat ride?
No, I don't remember any of it. I tried to recreate for myself. I was 2.5. I do remember very slightly the first place we stayed in, which was some awful basement in Kansas City. I have a very foggy memory of that. But I think my memory starts more in this apartment when I was 3. We left from Genoa, so this is the ticket. I only have a copy of it. I'm sorry, it's very unclear, but that's the copy of the ticket for 3, for 2 adults and 1 child, going to America.
The copy of in the boat, for the boat?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any registration papers from Italy?
I did actually get a birth certificate, and I can't put my hand on it right now. When we were there 10 years ago, we had a ceremony and we each got a birth certificate. And I had, and I don't know where my original one that my parents got, but they gave us a copy, and I had a lot of information from that because they put down my parents' professions on there. They put down the time of day that I was born, which I hadn't known before. And it was interesting to see because there was more information on it than I actually had gotten from my parents. When the Spielberg Institute, for memory of, they called it the Midwest Holocaust Memory Institution, Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, they took the survivors that were living at the time and they interviewed them, and there's each of them has a story here. And so this is tells a little bit about each of
your parents.
My parents are in here as well, and of course these are people I grew up with. All these people are their children. They themselves were bigger than life. I described them as bigger than life when I was growing up. These were full of laughter and joy. We would go every Sunday to the park, a very large, wonderful park, and they would have an accordionist, and they would dance polka and Israeli, kind of hora and different kinds of things. And we kids were young children, and we would play war. That's what we would do. It was a very interesting kind of, yes. So this is very nice because it tells a little bit about how he told his story. There are recordings as well. They have recordings.
Can we see the picture?
Mm-hmm. And this is done when they were, I think, must have been around age 70 or so, something like that they did these.
Yeah, but they did with your mom as well?
Yes, the next page. And of course, Elizabeth and Sam and all the different people that they became friends of. Every Saturday night there was ballroom dancing when they were older, and each time in a different person's house. when they got a little older and beyond dancing, they had a poker game or a rummy game every Saturday night. But their laughter all the time, they're just so full of joy to be alive, to be have children, to be free. It was
Chana,
very
did your
special.
parents ever speak to you about the experiences in the Shoah?
No, not a lot. My very few. My mother would say how the people, yes, how the people were very. The community that she lived in were her friends, the non-Jews. She always spoke about what I told you about, the selection. When she, this is a direct quote from her, and she once talked to me about a couple of times where she did something in the concentration camp that should have gotten her killed, but she was lucky and didn't get killed. She was, different people dealt with being in concentration camp in a different way. My father and mother were the opposites. My father took his opportunities, saw where he could do something, saw where he could survive, saw where he could help people around him survive. And he was always very active. My mother always was a very devout person. And she kind of had a sense, I had a sense that she kind of floated above it. That her spirit stayed above it the whole time. So she did some things like, if there was a man who had cut off what my mother said is they gave you clothing that didn't fit. The pants were too long, or the shirt was too short, or the skirt was, everything was in order to make you feel worse and worse. And to make you feel, lashpil, what is it, to
disgrace.
Yes, for you to feel like nothing. And so there was a man who had cut off the cuffs of his pants that were too long and attached them to the sleeves which were too short, and he was hung. And they brought everyone there to watch how he was hung. My mother was working in the kitchen. She was very clean, and she cut off some of her skirt and made an apron. So I don't know how she threaded it or whatever, but she made an apron. And you would think, she told this story, that you would think that she would get punished for it. And she walked into the kitchen, and the officer said, "Ay, a shirtzela, an apron." Nothing. And there was another time she saw her uncles, and she said, she saw how hungry they looked, and she stole 2 loaves of bread from the kitchen and brought it to them. When she came back, the kappa gave her a big slap, and that was it. But I'm saying people were killed for nothing there, and she somehow floated through. And she said there was a man who would always come, and there was something about him that made her give him a little more in the ladle that she was able to. And she found out at the end that he was feeding his father too. She knew nothing, but there was some feeling she had that she should try to somehow give him a little more without being seen. So these are the stories I have. I don't have many, and they didn't talk about how their hunger or about their. They talked about how they this is another one. She liked to tell the ones that were a bit humorous too. She said, we were 4 in a plank where they would slept together, those 4 women, and if one of us wanted to turn around, the whole group had to turn around. You always had to be do it together, whatever you were doing. It had to be in coordination. So these are the kind of things. She doesn't tell me a lot more than that. Didn't tell me a lot more than that. And my father, he was preparing furniture for the people who were running Dachau. That's what they were doing essentially in the carpentry shop. So he would come in, the person who was the block, I don't know if he was the campfire or who he was, but he would come in and he would have conversations with him about the wood. That was about it. Yeah. But no, they didn't. And he talked about his younger cousin, his 17-year-old cousin, who he was always trying to pull out of any time that it looked like he was going to be pulled into some death kind of line or whatever. The other thing my father did is that, as I said, he was waiting for his sister. This is a story he would tell, he was waiting for his sister, and by chance, into the DP camp, he heard a voice, and he turned around, and it was Leah Tudra. Leah Tudra was a friend of his from Tavrik, and she had been together with his sister and had been kept in Stutthof with the other Lithuanian women. So she was the one who told the story of his sister's death. She said, she's gone. He didn't know that she was dead until he met Leah. Leah said that her name was Perla, his sister. Perla had gotten typhoid, was very weak, and then they were marching them in the snow out of the camps when they were when they were evacuating the concentration camps, and she didn't have any more strength.
From Dachau? She was
She was in Stutthof. That's where they kept some of the...
This was the death march.
Yes, this was like January, something like that, January,
and they
February.
were marching them to where?
Just out of there. I don't know. They were evacuating them from Stutthof, and I don't know to where. A lot of this, when I began to try to look it up, I had to look it up historically, because not everyone know the stories. It's very clear. So she took her on her back. Leah put Perla on her back and carried her. And Perla said, "Put me down. You won't survive this way." And she put her down, and they shot her. And so for my father, this was the end, just the end of the world, because that was what he felt responsible for. And every time he would look at me, not every time, but often he would look at me and he would get tears in his eyes and he would say, "Perla, Perla," because my second name is Chana Penina, Perla. And so I felt I carried her in some way. I made a book for my father's 70th birthday of paintings and poems having to do with being a second generation. So this is a photo, the only photo we have of Perla, which here.
This is Perla, the very bottom.
Yes, that's a picture of her. And what I tried to imagine is her life. She was 17 when she was killed. I tried to imagine her life and her last year. And so what I have in here is from Yad Vashem. I got different pictures, and what we have here, this is from the barracks of Stutthof. This is Stutthof here. I have pictures of the Shuk in Vilna, which I would imagine a lot of places in Lithuania had a similar kind of marketplace happening. I have here different parts of this have to do, there's a place called Shulgas, which after I had interviewed different ones of my relatives here to get more information about my grandparents, because I didn't have a lot of information. So
this is a picture of
my grandmother and grandfather, my parents of my father, Lithuanian. Okay, this is Shlomo Nissan Rothstein, and this is Chanatisha Shlomensky Rothstein. Shlomovich Rothstein. And apparently she was, when I spoke to her, she has I interviewed a living friend of hers, a relation as well from Lithuania, who came to Israel with the Russian Aliyah in the 90s. And I asked her about my grandmother, what she was like. So she told me she liked earrings. Here I don't see it, but she wore a certain kind of agate earrings, which is a local stone that's a kind of brownish stone from the area, and that they would walk on shulgas. Shulgas was where all the synagogues were. There were several together, and they would walk there on Friday night, and she had a long black coat, and she was describing what she was like. So I took a figure here. There's a black coat here, and there is the area of walking down. And I took various things, Bekitsur, I took various things from Lithuanian places that I got at Yad Vashem and at Beit HaTfutzot, different images that were kept. So, yes, there's Shulgas. At the very back is Shulgas. But the whole thing is built out of a collage of things that were happening when the Jews were being collected from different towns, and what their former life was, and the concentration camp. And this young girl, that's what her last 5-6 years were like. So this, I have some of the photos that you've seen that I used in this, and I have poems, and I have a little bit of a story about what it was like growing up, and what it was like inside of me experiencing this kind of thing of being second generation, of feeling responsible for my parents, of feeling responsible only to bring them good things, not to, they had enough in their life. So the reason I was bringing this is because we had talked about parallel. So this is a self-portrait of mine, and next to it I have a poem where I look at myself and I say, like my father does, Perla, Perla, do I know you? You know, and
your father
Very
must have.
special.
yeah, this was amazing when he got this. Absolutely,
I'm sure.
yeah. But for me, it was very important to put it together.
It was a journey.
Yeah, and the thing was, I had a project in mind. That there are all these people without faces. I don't know what they look like. I can ask about them and get different details like I did about this grandmother, but I don't know what they look like. So how do you create a portrait without a face? So I was collecting information of different kinds, and I thought, I'm going to do an art project this way. And I got to a point where I couldn't ask my parents the questions. It was too hard for me to ask them the questions, and
they never told you about their parents?
I knew a little bit. I knew my mother thought her father was amazing. He was very bright. He was in his way, although he was a Hasid, he was very in favor of having a general education. He had his daughter go to high school and get matriculated. He brought in someone to teach her a profession, so she would have sewing as well. He brought in private tutors for his son who was at yeshiva, so he would have general knowledge as well. And he was a dreamer. He said, when he realized what was happening, he said, we're going to sell everything, I'm going to buy an airplane, and we're going to fly out of here. Also Coco Schmal, you know the song? Which was his favorite song. Yeah. That was his favorite song, but it's like that, you know?
Yeah.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah.
But so I get this feeling, I have a sort of feeling about him of being kind of a dreamer, but he was a shochet. He was, you know, he didn't earn a living and whatever. And my mother would say, I always missed him because he had to go to his Rebbe every Shabbat, and it was a 7-kilometer walk, and then that's where we would spend his day. So I have a feeling she was much more attached to her father. Her mother seems to have been a very astute businesswoman, and her grandmother lived with them and loved to be industrious. So when she didn't have anything to sew, she opened up the seams and sewed them again. The grandmother was the one whose family of these vineyards came from. When we came to Kansas City, it was the center of the kosher meatpacking. In 1949, that's where the kosher butchers were, and also it was a place, Kansas City was a place for meatpacking in general. So there were a lot of Rabbanim there, and the Rabbanim needed a school for their children, and there were Holocaust survivors with small children. So they created a preschool that spoke Yiddish. One man who was there who spoke Yiddish with us, because that's what the language everyone knew, and who taught us and who spoke Hebrew with us too, and taught us things in Hebrew. This is like age 3 to 5. And we had an American couple, a lovely non-Jewish couple, both former teachers, retired teachers, who taught us English. So this was for both the Rabbanim and the Shochatim, and it was for the Holocaust survivors. So I have a picture of the group, but I don't know, can't put my hands on it right now. And so that's how we started. We were a group who were in the same situation together, and that was also kindergarten. We didn't go to public kindergarten like you do in America. We were still in this school for kindergarten, and it gave us a good basis for school. So it was what I remember is Teddy, who was our Hebrew and Yiddish teacher, would pull coins out of our ears and our noses, and it was a fun sort of thing. And this couple, we kept in touch with them for ages. We would go to them every year to say thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Paul. They were a lovely, lovely couple who taught us English. But I remember being in first grade was not easy. We were 1 or 2 Jewish children in a classroom, and it was, I have a strong memory of that classroom, that with the ABC across the board, and on my table was my pencil box. And up till then I'd been Chanaleh. I'd always been Chanaleh. So it was written Anne. Now, how did I get the name Anne? My mother went to the next door neighbor and said, they're not going to be able to say Chana or Chanaleh. What'll I call her? They said, well, Anne or Allison. I don't know why. But they chose Anne, so they told the teacher, and it was written, and that's the first time I saw it written, and it was on my pencil box. So I was a very quiet first grader in the back, very shy. This was very foreign to me. I'd been in a place where everybody was like me, and now I was not. But I was a very good student because I was interested in learning. I got the reading prize in first grade. But it was, so to be accepted, I remember a little girl would yell on the playground, Anne is a foreigner. It's like they knew. I guess I had an accent. I don't know what it, or I was
Yiddish accent.
Probably, and I looked very different from them probably. I know I hated it when my mother would come to school. She was too beautiful. She was beautiful and not like the American women with, just put on whatever they had. She looked great. She was elegant. And I thought, God, don't stick out so much, But I remember that and her looking great, but looking like this is not my milieu either. So yes, we felt foreign, definitely felt foreign. There was an anti-Semitic was only here or there. There was really not nothing to speak of. Here or there it happened.
And can I ask, what message do you give to the future generations?
First of all, we are so fortunate that we have Israel, that we have our place, that we have our land. I had to make full circle I felt my parents say it was me. I had to make that first circle and come here, and it was a wise decision. This is where the future of the Jewish people is. This has been a very difficult year and a half for all of us, and we've seen very terrible expressions of anti-Semitism in the world. One of the things that struck me, and what I feel about that, on the good side of that, there has been a reawakening, I think, of Jewish identity. What I would say is that this hostage situation has brought up for me what it was for my parents, and to think about that. And the message is that people are going through something so terrible, not only without their freedoms, but with such horrible conditions and such degradation and whatever, and our responsibility is to have those people back. My parents went through 9 months of concentration camp. These people have been in hell for a year and a half. We have to bring them back. And I see this next generation of my grandchildren or my children, they're a wonderful generation. They're just done so many beautiful things in this period. I do expect a lot of them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Chana, I am so grateful to you and Miriam as well. It's been such an honor and a privilege to be with you both today, and your story is just remarkable. It really is. It's incredible. It's a triumph of survival. It really, really is. And your parents were just amazing in how they picked up their lives, and they made a future. And a happy future.
Absolutely.
And Miriam, you are a living example of also coming from the DP camps, and look what you've achieved.
Yeah.
Miriam got Yakir Yerushalayim. And
That's
it's
wonderful.
such an honor and a privilege to be with you
Thank you.
both. So I am so grateful from the bottom of my heart. I cannot thank you both enough.
I really thank you for talking about the DP camp.
What I could say without any memories of my own. Village, there were still mud roads. They weren't paved. So we came in, and she's wearing a pink leather coat like an American. And I'm, just an American girl, right? And we come in there with my uncle driving a car that they had bought him. My parents had bought him. And there's a woman walking by like, an old peasant woman with a scarf on her head, and she looks in the window, she says, "Olga?"
Wow.
Wow. It was so, suddenly people started coming out of the houses, and they invited us in to, what do you have as decoration in a Catholic house? Crosses, right? There's a Christ and crosses and whatever, and no other sort of pictures, really, I think. But these people were their friends, people she grew up with.
But it's a very amazing story that you are telling, that they were their friends.
Yes.
Because those Hungarians were worse than the SS.
This is
At least
interesting.
in Budapest. They just killed you if you knew that you are Jewish.
It's a crazy thing. Maybe because it's a small village.
Yeah, maybe. And all their neighbors just raided their homes and took everything.
I don't know. Maybe there were other neighbors who raided too. I don't know. But this woman had buried, and they had said that it was really the Nazis that had come and emptied the house. I would assume that was true. But
We have someone in our shul that his mother, on the last day before the war ended, went out to get food, and she never came back, and this was in Budapest.
Oh.
Yeah.
So Miriam, what you're saying, this is very unique.
Yeah. Yeah, they came and fed them. They came and brought things to the ghetto so they would have food.
And it's very unusual. Very unusual.
Well, thank you so much.
Very welcome. I think that's why my mother had very positive, my father had a whole more suspicious feeling toward non-Jews.
Yeah.
My mother's house was razed by the Nazis. When they were taken away to the ghetto, they had stolen everything from the house, and then they burned it down. What year was it my mother and father accompanied us to Hungary? I'm trying to think. So many years ago, let's say, I think it was about 20 years ago, we went to Hungary, and we went on a trip where we wanted my mother to, she already had the beginning of Alzheimer's, but we wanted her to tell us about the different places, so we visited her village, Uheli, Sarspotok, and she really came up with the stories. It was very good. And we came to the village, and there was a different house in this plot on the land where her house had been. And so she didn't recognize it first, and then she saw, oh, there's the well. So this is the story that goes with the house. As I said, the neighbors were very friendly and warm and all old-time friends of the family. So when they saw what was happening, one of the neighbors went and took their cake plates and cake platter from the house and buried it. They buried these 6 platters and the cake platter and buried it in the earth. When my uncle went back to his village. My mother never did. My mother went from Italy onto America. But my uncle, who had gone through Bergen-Belsen, came back. They didn't know they were each alive until the early 50s, my mother and her brother. But he went back to the village, and one of the neighbors came out and she says, I have something for you. And she gave him, in perfect condition, these things that she had buried. She said, these are yours.
Did she remember then? Did your mother remember?
Of course. And these were given to her brother. Now we went in 1967, just before the war. I went with my mother to Hungary. And her brother said to her, Olga, you wash these every Shabbat. These are for you. You have to take them. So my mother took them at that time, and she said to me, Hanale, these are yours. When I go, this will be yours. So when my mother died, I said to my brother, you want maybe some of these? He said, no, Mom said this is for you, so you keep them. So.
Very nice.
And if you notice, this was a Hasidic family, and these are cupids. So I find it so interesting what was acceptable as just a regular Rococo kind of design, and what would be accepted in a Hasidic home today, right?
No, it wouldn't.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's in mint condition.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I looked it up online, and apparently he's quite well known. Joseph Steidl. And
it says here Z Naim.
yeah, he's Jewish, which is unusual for a craftsman.
Yeah.
And they're numbered.
Yeah.
So